Hello, everyone. I was so dissatisfied with my video on installing something into VirtualBox that I'm doing it over again. Sorry for the relaxed attire. Yeah, I'm doing this just before Christmas. Waka waka. Merry Christmas to you and happy holidays. Anyway, you won't be seeing this until afterwards. It'll never be applicable in this class, but I do want you to be happy and excited about this class. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. We're going to share via VirtualBox Manager. So that's actually all you're seeing there. It's just that window, which will make it bigger on your screen, which is awesome. So this is Oracle VM VirtualBox. You download it and install it, and I will once again show you that, but that'll be at the end of the video. It installs like a standard application. It's not very difficult to do. Just need to make sure that you get the right one. And you can see here that I've got a lot of things installed, a lot of different stuff. And I'm going to show you how to install an operating system. So here we go. Brand new, I am going to say this is Linux. Now, the great thing is as you type something in here, if you are specific, notice it went to Windows 7 on that screen. To put in Windows 10, it'll change that for me. It automatically tries to set things the way you ought to have them. Now, I'm going to tell you the honest truth. I could say Linux and then install Windows 10 in it. There's not this big secret thing that's happening way down low, and if you select the wrong thing, it'll never work. What VirtualBox again is doing is creating a base layer that your guest OS will sit on. So VirtualBox is going to say, this is how much RAM, this is how much hard disk space, this is how much video memory, this is what the CPU is, and whether or not it has 2 cores or 1 core or whatever, right? That's what it's doing. So it plays this layer of hiding what the host OS, which is usually for you Windows 10, needs, does, and continues to do, right? So this is a type 2 hypervisor, as I've said. And so it's actually trying to figure things out there. So if I just type Linux, it's like, oh, Linux 234, it's generic. If I was to type a very well-known version, then, oh, Fedora, I know that. 64-bit version is the common one, right? It kind of picks for you. And so you can actually come down here and see all the stuff that's down there. And again, this is not a compatibility list. It's not saying, oh, well, I can't find that version of Linux that I want to install. For instance, as I've said in other videos, I like Linux Mint, which I already have installed. Let me come up here. Linux Mint. It doesn't have anything other than it kind of knows, well, it's a derivative of Ubuntu. That sounds good. Right, and so it's just general settings. It's going to be okay. I'm actually going to tell it Linux Mint. I think I have the ISO file for that. If I don't, then I'll be doing something else. Now, for you, this would be the standard thing here. It's telling you this is where I'm going to put this, right? This is where I'm going to store it. And that usually is in the users folder, in the James folder, whatever your user ID is right here. And then it creates a VirtualBox VMs folder right alongside documents and pictures and music and so on. If you have a notebook, then you may be in a situation where you're like, I don't have that much space. So I don't want you to put it on the C drive. I want you to put it someplace else, which is my situation. I actually want to tell it, you know what, go to my D drive, and I have created a VirtualBox folder there. And that's where I want to put it, is in that VirtualBox folder. So I'm telling it, go ahead and put it over there. Now it's going to create a subfolder inside of that for me, which is nice. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next. At this point, it's like, okay, well, Ubuntu takes, right? That's what it's going off of. That's where that little setting kind of helps. Again, there's no secret magic stuff. There's not like an Ubuntu file it's sticking in there, or a Windows 10. It's just saying, oh, what I know about Ubuntu or what I know about Windows 10, this is the memory you require, right? So I'm going to install Mint, and I know a little bit about Linux, so I'm going to say, you know what, I want 4 gigs. And notice it started with 1. But again, those are suggestions. It's not telling you that's what you need to do. And often it will be wrong. So when you're installing Fedora, because that's the one you need to get, download and get, um, it's going to come up with it and say, hey, this is what you need to do. Don't follow that if you got more. That's what I wanted to tell you. So if you've only got 4 gigs, that's what this conversion is, right? 4,608 megabytes. So we've got 4 gigs there. If you've only got 4 gigs of RAM, then you can't make it 4 gigs. And this little chart, this little bar right here at the bottom, will help you because right here, see, it's saying, hey, you can go all the way up to this green line. Let's take it all the way to that point. So it's saying you can give it 10 gigs. That'll leave 6 gigs for your OS. That's what this little nice pink, or you could say light green and light red area is saying. Once you say, I'm going to be giving it more than that, now what it's telling you by the red mark is, hey, your host OS, the OS you run on your computer, is now going to have trouble because you're not giving the host OS enough for it to work. So we don't want to go into the red. And so if you had only 4 gigs, down here it would say 4 megabytes, up here it would say 4 gigs, and in the middle here you'd be around, you know, 1.5 gigs or something like that. And so you do have to be careful with that. It'll definitely run on 4 gigs, but you want to make sure whatever guest you're installing in there is not taking up that much. So for instance, it had me going at 1 gig, saying we could do that. I could take this down comfortably to 2 gigs. So if you had 4 gigs, you could say, let me split that between my Fedora and my Windows install. It's going to be really slow on your computer, but it will still work. So remember that when that OS, the guest OS, is running, it's using that amount of RAM. So once this is installed and you click on it and run it, it goes, oh, you said I have 2 gigs. 2 gigs, and it takes it and uses it. That's the way that works. On this system, I've got 16 gigs. I'll often have students ask me, you know, to go through these computer programs, I've got to have this awesome, most powerful computer, right? No, no, you're not going through game programming. Um, uh, the only reason that you would need 16 gigs, for instance, like I have on this computer here, is if you're going to run multiple VMs at a time, or you're going to run multiple huge programs at a time. So even within Windows, right? Windows, if you go to your task manager and take a look, it'll run around 4 gigs. And then if you've got 16 gigs or so, then it'll up that by a couple of gigs. It'll do some other stuff. But basically, Windows will run just fine at 3.4, 3.5 gigs of space. So that's why if you have 4 gigs of RAM, your Windows will run slow because it pretty much needs 4 gigs of RAM. And now you're trying to do something else on top of it. And so it's got to flip flop things around from the storage to the RAM to the storage to the RAM. That's a different story. So what you want to do is if you were going to get a computer for our computing program, yeah, 16 gigs is great if you're going to run a lot of VMs. 8 is just fine, right? If Windows has taken 4, that still leaves you 4 gigs to run VMs in. Most people don't run more than 1 VM at a time. But if you were one of those that said, hey, I'm going to run Windows 10 in a VM, and I'm going to run Kali Linux because you're in the security classes, I'm going to run that in a VM, and then I'm going to run Fedora in a VM. And each one of those is saying, give me 4, give me 4, give me 4. All right, now you're up to 12 gigs that you're using. So really, virtualization is where having a more powerful computer with more RAM and more storage actually does come in as a benefit. As a matter of fact, a lot of students would think, you know, I'm going to take that ethical hacker class. That's a real top-end difficult class. I'm going to take that. I'm probably going to have a supercomputer to. No, you're going to run these little tools and monitor network and Wi-Fi and stuff like that. You really don't need anything more than what I would say is standard today, which would be 8 gigs with about 4 cores. You're going to run just fine. And most of that 8 gigs and 4 cores is just for your Windows. It's not like the applications take that much to run. But you take an easier class like a CMP 113 or a CIS 191, and then it's like, hey, I've got to run some VMs. Right now, we're taking hard disk space, we're taking RAM, and we're taking processor power, and we're allowing a guest OS to use that as well as the host. And then you start to see trouble, right? If you want to run more than one thing, then you're going to start to see a slowdown. Again, you got an old piece of junk and it's only got 4 gigs. It's okay. You can still get it done. You can still use VirtualBox, and everything's going to be okay. It'll just be slower. Now, again, here at EAC, we have all this installed, but most students, they want this. They want this on their machines. So anyway, let's get back to the story. So I have a bunch, right? So I really don't need to stick with 2 gigs. I know that most operating systems are going to take 4. Now, Linux Mint is very, not very trimmed down. It's a very trim. It's a trim operating system. It's not as big as Fedora is, and I like it because of that. It's like a good medium for me. So it really won't use the 4 gigs, but I'll give it to it because I've got 16. All right, then you come up with, okay, what do we do with the hard disk? Now, the hard disk is not the real hard disk. You're not going to take your C drive and make that available inside of any of these VMs. You're not going to say, oh, I better have an external drive that I plug in as E, and that's my virtual. No, you don't have to do that. What it's going to do is create a file that'll sit on one of those drives. Doesn't matter if it's Mac or Linux or Windows. So right here we have do not add a virtual hard disk. That doesn't get you anywhere. So don't select that. Create a virtual hard disk, and it says, we think 10 gig will probably do you. And then use an existing. So you can actually have a hard drive that maybe you used in a hard drive file that you basically used in a different operating system as a different VM. You can actually go select that. To me, I don't do that. If I don't want Windows 3.1 here, then I right click on it and I delete all the files. That's what I do. So I'm going to create a virtual hard disk. And then it asks, okay, well, what type? Okay, so the VDI file is the VirtualBox format for that file. It's going to be a whatever.vdi. These two are actually for VMware, and they're there because VMware is big and they're used a lot. So you have no reason to change this. Just let it go as a VDI. But this one has a few more options here on this screen. How do we want to deal with this physical hard drive? Notice it's got dynamic selected, and they kind of tell you what this means. But dynamic means, okay, you're going to allot 30 gigs for this file. Dynamic means that when I report the hard disk size to this guest operating system, I'm going to tell it has 30 gigs. However, I will actually just build that dynamically. So the install only took 12 gigs. That's how much space I'll take up on the actual hard drive. But I'll still tell the OS it's got 50. That's a great thing. I usually select dynamically allocate, because I don't know. I've got a lot of VMs here, and I don't know what I'm going to use it for. And chances are I'm never going to use 30 gigs or 50 gigs. It'll be less than that. So I'll just let the OS think it's got more space than it's actually taking up. However, you might want to select fixed. Now, it sounds strange, but fixed would be used when you are low on disk space. You think it would be this way, right? Well, it could be. The problem is we usually don't monitor that kind of thing too much. And when you say, look, I'm going to use 30 gigs for this guest OS, I want you to take 30 gigs from my hard drive. And it will create a 30 gig file. Even though you've only got 10 gigs installed in it from the guest OS, it'll still appear on the hard drive as 30. And the reason why that can be important is if you have a small hard drive, you often want to know how much is being taken now, because you can get yourself into a problem. And this is how. Say you have um, a small hard drive, we'll say 256 gigs. And so that's hard. That's hard to deal with. You got a 256 gig hard drive, and you pay a lot of attention to it, trying to make sure that you don't use too much. But now you got to install this stuff. And so you're like, okay, I'll use dynamic. So I'll tell it, go ahead and use up to 50 gigs. But the install is only going to take 12, and I'll probably never use any more after that. All right, so you take up that 12 gigs, and then you start doing other stuff. And then on your 256 gig drive, you end up doing a ton of stuff on it that you hadn't planned, and you're really not watching. And now it's only got 20 gigs free. Now, that 20 gigs free is after the 12 gigs that's already been used, but you told the guest OS that it had 30. And you start doing stuff in that guest OS, and you start really installing, like, what's Linux gaming like? So, you start installing stuff in there. And then all of a sudden you start getting these weird errors, because what will happen is the guest operating system says, I've got 30 gigs, and the actual physical disk has only got 20 gigs left. And so you don't necessarily, hey, you ran out of space on your host OS. It'll actually just start throwing up crazy errors. And so the time to use fixed is when you know, well, I'm not going to really track this, and I probably will delete it after this class anyway. So if you got a ton of space, you can do either one, but it's up to you. I just want you to understand, what does dynamically allocating mean? It means it's not going to take up that disk space. You said 30 gigs, it's only going to take what it needs, but it will report to the guest OS that it has 30. And if you fill up that 30, then you're going to fill up 30 in the host OS, and you better have that space available. So I'll hit dynamic. This is where it says, hey, this is where I'm going to put it. That's where I said way back in the beginning, go put it in VirtualBox, and then this is what it's going to create here. And then there's my 10 gig file. So they said, hey, I'm going to make a 10 gig file, but they give you the option. And honestly, Linux Mint, I would say, should take about 25. We'll give it 26. Right, so you can turn this into more, and it actually is telling you, hey, on this drive, there's 2 terabytes you could be using, or you got 4 megs down to that. So I'm going to say 26. That is where you can start running into trouble. Like if you've made that portion too small and you didn't realize that the Fedora install is going to take up 30 gigs, right? Then I don't have enough space. And once you start the install process, the guest OS will tell you that. Fedora will say, well, the hard disk's not big enough. I got a problem. Now I'm going to show you, let's just go take a look at a file right now. So let me change my share here. Do the whole screen. All right, so here's my share. Let's go into, I've got a bunch of stuff on my iCloud. Sorry, you have to watch me browse. Installs. So I've got a bunch of installs in here, and I've got a lot of them under ISO. ISO stands for International Standards Organization. And when they standardized on a CD format, they gave the extension an ISO extension. And so an ISO means I'm a CD or a DVD image. So I'm not a CD or DVD, I'm an image of that. So let's move on. So let's see, there's Hyper-V's server, and I can look at the file size. Actually, I won't select it because then you can't see it too well. But the file size for Hyper-V is 2.7 gigs. Now, all installs are compressed. I shouldn't say all, there's going to be something that's not, but everything we deal with is compressed. So if we come down to something like Windows Multiple Edition here, right, it's 4 gigs. So it's compressed into that 4 gigs. If that's extracted, it's going to be more than half. So it'll be about 10 gigs. So if we were to take all that data and say you're not compressed, that's a 10 gig space. So to install Windows, it uncompressed would need 10 gigs. So if I make the size of the hard disk 8 gigs for my Windows 10 install, I'm not going to have enough space. But if I had above 10, I would. See where I'm going with this? So what I'm trying to say is you can actually come out and you can look at an ISO file, like there's OpenSUSE Leap, sorry, and that is 4.2, almost 4.3 gigs. If we extracted that, it'd be about 10 to 12 gigs. It's probably going to need a 15 to 18 gig hard drive, so I'll have some space, to do something. Again, the honest truth is you're not doing a bunch of stuff with this. You're not installing a bunch of applications or anything. The things you have to do in class are going to be more settings related and finding things in the settings and so on. So you don't need to make it huge. But if you think, I'm going to play around with it too, make room, make some room. All right, so there's quite a few there. I've also got a whole Windows 10 folder, and I don't see Mint in here, so that's okay. I'll actually just select OpenSUSE. I'm not going to finish this install. So OpenSUSE is what we're going to go grab. We'll grab that one. Or maybe something smaller, like gparted, that's really tiny. That's in the ISO. I've also got other things that I can select here that are not in the ISO. There's Kali, there's Fedora. Fedora is 1.9 gig file, and so on. There's Ubuntu. So Ubuntu is pretty close to my Mint. My Mint's probably sitting in my downloads folder. Anyway, I'm not selecting it from here. I just wanted you to see the file size. Now what we're going to do is take a look at how do we install this. Okay, so let me show you what will happen if we just start it up. And I probably should change my share to just the screen so you can have that zoomed in. So we're going to start that up, and it did start up. There it is. As a matter of fact, I don't want anything going wrong here, so we'll go back to screen. All right, so at this point, when it starts up, it realizes I don't really have anything to boot into. So could you select an optical drive where it is? Or could you select an ISO file where that would be? And basically what we have attached already is things that I've done before. So your screen would come up and there would be nothing here. You wouldn't have any of this stuff. And so then you have to go through and say, well, I need to add one here. I need to go out and add one. And let's see what happens. We'll grab, whoops, you know what? We'll just grab, right, there's Zen server. We had Ubuntu. We'll grab Ubuntu. We'll hit open on that. And then there's Ubuntu, right? And it actually shows, okay, there it is. It's 286. So choose that. Go ahead and choose that. And then hit start. And then I'm going to show you the other way to do it. And why I'm going to show you the other way to do it is because you may run into trouble with this way. We're not having trouble. There it is. It's booting up. It's starting the install process, basically. Well, it's not starting the install process. It's loading the OS. So that worked just fine. Let me show you the other way. So let's power off this machine. And if that doesn't work for you, right? If you can't go, you might have to rewind so you can see what I did. But if you can't go and select that file and have it work, then the next thing you do is make sure you selected what the OS, the guest that you're going to install into, and then come in and look at storage. Under storage, you will have a CD drive. Now, because mine worked, you will note, you need to move something that you can't see on the screen. There we go. You will note it already says Ubuntu on it. If yours didn't work, it won't say this. So what you would do is you'd hit the CD and you'd say, you know what, I need to choose, right? I need to choose. And notice I have some stuff here, right? That's because I've installed other things. So you won't have anything there. I need to choose a disk file. And then I can go and find that. That's basically, I'm at the same place I was before. If you drop this down right here, you can choose This is creating a virtual disk. That's back where we were. So you can choose a disk file. Okay, I'm going to pause for a minute and say, what in the heck is this live CD DVD? Most Linux installs are live CD DVDs. You don't have to have this checked, but this will let it know, look, I have to boot off of that CD and then I'll be in this OS that's running. Then I'll have to select install from there. So it's not mandatory is what I'm telling you. This is mandatory, making sure that you have chose the correct disk file. And I have one. Let me just see if there's something still in my downloads. Close this. Firmware. Hey, there's Windows 98. Clonezilla. That's a small little file. Yeah, so I guess I deleted it. It's not there. We could try to install second edition Windows. But anyway, I'll just cancel this. Mine's set up to go. So if the first way to do it didn't work, come in here and set that up. Later on, you would want to come in and remove the disk. So once the install is actually finished, you really don't want it booting off of the CD anymore. And that's the bad thing about having to do it this way. If you do it this way, it may cause you a little trouble that when the install is done, it actually still boots off of a CD. And I've had students do that. And they're like, oh, I can't change this and I can't change that. I'm getting these errors in Fedora. And I'll say, well, chances are in your VM, you didn't remove the disk. And so it's still booting to that CD. And you think you're booting from your hard disk, your pretend hard disk, but you're not. All right, so let's go ahead and start this up. And I'll show you a little bit about installing Linux. They're all pretty much the same, and I'm going to show you two different versions here. So this is Ubuntu that we'll be installing. All right, I pause it for a minute so you can see that. And then notice these messages. Make sure you read those messages at the top. I'm not going to take the time to do that now because I've read them many times. But make sure you do that so you understand what that's telling you. And here we go. Okay, so basically at this point, what's happening is it's running the full, not the full, almost full Ubuntu operating system from a CD, from a DVD. So it is not installed. It is not installed. I say that, I have people that will not watch this whole thing, right? They'll just skip through and then they won't have it installed correctly. So what's happening is it looks like, wow, it showed me that bar. I don't think that was installed, but here we are, right? And notice you have these options. So this is what they call a live CD. You can try it right now. If you click this button, you can still get back to this menu, but it won't be as easy as you think. You can try it, and this screen will go away, and you can just mess around with the OS without changing anything to your computer. I'm going to hit install, and then that will actually start the install process. And I'm not going to actually install this. So I'm going to go through and hit continue, normal installation, download updates while installing. That's always a good idea for any OS, but you can choose what you want there. It's going to show me my hard disk, and that's basically what I will stop the install process at that point, and we'll look at Fedora so you can see that. Still trying. After all, this is taking some memory. As a matter of fact, let's take a look. Let's take a look at my task manager while this is going and just say, you know what, what's going on here? How much memory? Yeah, so we're using 11 gigs out of the 16. And of course, I could stop this OS altogether, and you can see what's left. So erase the disk and install Ubuntu. Fedora does the same thing. Linux Mint does the same thing. If you're going to install Windows 10, it does the same thing. I just want to pause here because people will kind of freak out at this point and go, whoa, am I going to delete my hard drive? Remember, this operating system, as we call it, a guest operating system, cannot actually see and touch the physical disks. It's talking about the file you created. So what I'm telling you is we're good. If I hit install now, away it goes. It's starting to install. I don't want to do that. I'm actually going to power off this machine. Now notice the option here. We can save the machine state, send the shutdown signal, or power off, which we had in the other video. I'm going to kill it. Power off means I held down the power button. I killed it. Now I'm going to show you Fedora. So what I'm going to do is come into the settings, and I'm going to come back down to storage, and I'm going to select that, and I'm going to say, you know what? I don't want that one. And again, I actually have Fedora right here because I've installed it before, but I'm going to say choose a disk file so you can see me do it. ISO, there's all my Windows stuff. Where's my Fedora? So OpenSUSE, you just scroll up through this. I don't see my Fedora in there. Maybe it's back in my installs folder instead of ISOs. Sometimes I'm sloppy that way. There it is. There's Fedora Workstation. That's what you use in the class. So I'm sure students are like, why didn't you just show us that? That's the one we're going to use. Yeah, but I want you to learn a little more about Linux and be able to feel comfortable with saying, hey, I installed Fedora. That's what I needed for the class. Now I'm going to go install Mint or Ubuntu or something else just to see the difference. All right, so I pointed that to a different CD, DVD, ISO file. I will hit start, and now you will notice that it doesn't install Ubuntu. It says Fedora Workstation, and I'm actually moving my cursor around in there. And they don't have the option of install right from here. They say start Fedora Workstation live. So it's a live CD. So I'm going to hit that, and we'll let it go. But we'll see something very similar that's become more of a standard in giving you that install option along with let me try it. Get a bunch of Linux going on the screen there. That's what it should look like. Don't worry about any errors if you see any stops or failed on this screen, unless it actually affects you installing. Again, if there was a stop on this or an error on that, you'd see it in red, and you can look at exactly what it is. But basically, what I'm telling you not to worry so much about it is the fact that it's doing a lot of general things. And so you may have something that fails because your PC is just not set up for that, and it won't affect the install process. The only time you worry about something that's stopped on there is when your install is not working right. So this too is loading GNOME. So it's loading GNOME, and when I say GNOME, I mean this graphical interface you see is GNOME. So when we say it's Fedora, we actually are talking about all the packages that are put together that make the Fedora install. If we say GNOME, we're talking about just the graphical interface. And if we say Linux, we're actually talking about just the kernel, just the core of the OS. Right? So look at that. This VirtualBox Guest Editions update available. This is actually inside. So Fedora knows enough to look at what's being presented to it and goes, hey, this is a VirtualBox install. This is not actually on a computer. And so they're letting you know, hey, when you want to get this enhanced, follow these instructions. And there we are, try it or install. So if we hit install to hard disk there, it actually shows graphically how much room it's going to take up on that hard disk, which is cool. And again, it's going to be slower. It's going to be slower because it's only using what you gave it. English. The Fedora install is really nice, except for this. That's not as easy as Ubuntu. See, notice here it's like installation destination, automatic partitioning selected, and it's got this big exclamation, and all you can do is quit. What they want you to do is click. And there it is. It's saying, hey, I'm going to install it here on this VirtualBox hard disk that, hey, look at that. It's only 26 gigs because guess what? That's what we told it. And now I can hit done on this. This is, to me, the annoying thing. And it'll take a minute. And oh, look at that. See, it was selected and now it unselected it. So make sure you hit it, make sure you select that. And then it goes through a little check process and then says, okay, now you can begin. So if you don't have begin installation, come in here and just, that's all you got to do is say, I want that one, want that one. And it'll do a little check and then begin installation at that point. And here we go. Now it's doing it. It's creating it all. It's making it happen. And I don't care about this little system that I'm making, but at this point, that's how you install an OS. That's how you get it done. Now let's take a look. So we're kind of doing it in reverse a little bit, but that's just so that, you know, people don't have to waste their time if they don't need to. This next section is just to look at, well, where in the heck did you get Fedora? How did that happen? Before I show you that, I am actually going to show you how to delete these. You just right click them. You can actually, you know, go up to machine here. You can do all the same stuff and hit remove right from there. Or you can right click it. And see, it's the same menu. I'm going to say remove and notice it says, hey, you want me to just delete the settings portion and leave the hard drive? Nah, I want you to delete it all. So now it's gone. That file I made is gone. The reference to that DVD is gone. Just the reference. The DVD ISO is still sitting out there. It's not part of the install process, right? On any of these, if you want to get rid of that DVD, let's go to OpenSUSE. Go to settings and down to storage. And notice this is like, I can't find it. Yep, you can. Can't find it at all. I'm going to take off live CD. Oh, and it failed to save it because it's in a safe state. I'm so sorry. I am actually going to discard that. Oh, that's, well, we don't get into it. I don't want to get distracted. Let's actually, let's load that up. I just double clicked it. Let me jump over to Opera. Oh, look, it's got an error. It's non-fatal though. And we're in Opera. And so let me go down, just search for download Fedora. Yeah. Of course, the only thing you want to make sure of is that you're hitting the right site, that you're not getting a hacked version. And getfedora.org is the place to go. If you notice on any of these, get Fedora. Right now, here's a linuxxconfig.org. That's not their site. So we're going to go, yeah, we want to go and download Fedora Workstation. And then you download it on Windows or Mac. This will actually create a media for you. So if you actually wanted to take one of these files and then write it to a DVD, you could, but you don't need to. And this is x86. So that's Intel. This is your Intel. Sometimes this will say AMD 64. So your x86 is, again, an old term that's used for the actual command code that the processor uses. So this x86, that's why I explain that in classes. So you may not remember me talking about that, but that's saying, hey, this is Intel compatible. A lot of Linux just does not say, here's your Intel file, here's your AMD file. They'll list it as AMD 64 or x86 _ AMD 64. And then you kind of need to know what that means. So this is what we would download. There's the ISO file. These are for ARM, right? That's for if you're putting it on a tablet, if you were putting it on a phone, if you're using anything that's an ARM processor. So when I hit download on that, there it goes. And it tells me, hey, it's going to take a while, not too long for me. And I don't want it, so I'm going to hit X on it. That's how you get that. All right, so that's how you, and then a little tiny remembrance. Let's go to download VirtualBox. Now we use VirtualBox. I describe VirtualBox. In class, we have VMware installed on some systems for certain things we do, and VirtualBox is on everything because it's what people can use at home for free. So there we are, virtualbox.org is the place, and there's downloads on there. This one takes us to the same place. This takes us to Oracle. Oracle actually owns VirtualBox. So there's the downloads. I would go to Oracle's site and do that. I'm going to show you both. And there you can get a Windows installer, the DMG file, which is Mac. So that's your Mac OS, and then Sun Solaris, or it's not Sun Solaris, Oracle Solaris 11 is a version of Unix. So you would just download the Windows installer and away you go. And then there's guest editions, right? So you would download that, install it, then you would go and it would say, hey, do you want to do any guest add-ons? And you would actually run an install from this guest add-ons. But you don't need that. You don't need that. Like I said, when it came up and said, hey, you're running Fedora, you should, right? That's where this fits in. But I don't get into that because you don't need it as part of the class, but you can definitely do it. And then, of course, the extension pack. Every time you launch VirtualBox here, let me close that. It failed to open install. Anyway, so every time you launch VirtualBox, let me type that in, VirtualBox. It'll come up and it's not doing it now. That really is not nice for it to do. It'll come up and actually say, hey, there's an update for this. So sorry, I didn't do that this time. It did it the last time I opened it. And it'll tell you, hey, there's an update. Then you have to go download it again. It's not like a super easy process. Do you need to do that? No, you don't need to do that at all. You definitely don't. You can just run off of not having it updated. It's just fine. I don't want you to get bogged down in all this stuff. Like, do I need to do this? Do I need to do that? So if we go to downloads, Oracle VM VirtualBox, notice they've still got the old web page here. So this is their old web page, still showing the platform. Windows hosts, right? Because it's saying this is going to be the host OS, Mac OS, and Intel hosts. And then this is they're going for their Mac OS. That's for the new M2 stuff and Linux distribution. So you can also get it from here. I just wanted to show you. That's, two different places. I didn't want anybody being confused about that. And then you download it and install it like a regular program, whatever application you're done. All right, other things. So tidbits that, yeah, you only needed, how do I install an OS in there and get it going? I already show you in the other OS how to change different things, but this is little additional things that you might want to know. So here's our memory. Notice it's dumped down to 8 now. It's dumped down to 8. It was higher. And then CPU is at 14%. So there you go. And of course, you can go over and take a look at the details of that if you really wanted to. So let me, lastly, back to VirtualBox. I was hoping maybe it would come up with that. And let's here's Fedora and it's saved. Let's once again show you how to take a snapshot. So I'm going to go ahead and we will discard that state. That's what that does. So it was saved. I just told it, forget it. I don't need that saved. And the reason why is because I want to come up to the machine here and I want to say, where is it? There's my tools. Snapshots. So I want to go to Tools, Snapshots, and right after you fully installed something, notice it's got current state, and notice these icons have changed at the top. This is your snapshot settings. And so I'm going to take a snapshot and say this is working 1. Again, it's important to take a snapshot because you're going to do all sorts of stuff in this Linux Fedora. And you want to be able to do that freely. You don't want to feel like, oh, I don't want to mess up my virtual machine and have to install it all again. Well, there's a couple of things you can do to safeguard that. 1, take a snapshot. Then when you go down the road and you're doing all these little changes and you're like, this thing's working weird, I don't know what's going on with this, you can actually come into this screen and say, let's start up the snapshot. Notice there's working one and there's the current state. So you'll always be on the current state. Current state means what you're currently doing. Working one means this was taken from before, right? So you'll be able to come in and restore that state. Now, the other thing you can do, and I do kind of recommend this if you've got the room, clone it. So if you've got the room, Fedora clone, take a look at where it's going to put it. I'm not going to keep the disk names or keep the hardware. We don't want that. And then go ahead and say next. And it's like, well, do you want it linked? No, we want a full clone. We want it all on its own. And so if you've got, give me everything, not just the current state. And now you'll have two separate versions. Now, again, if I told it Fedora needs 50 gigs, now there's a whole nother file taking up 50 gigs because now I have two of them. But that's an ultimate backup there, right? You can now not use that. Use this one, right? Just use it however you want. And then if something goes wrong, you can go, well, I've got the clone down here from when I first started, so I'll just use that. So that's fantastic. It's fantastic to be able to do that. Let me launch this and watch our memory and our CPU use. There goes our memory. See it kicking up. See our CPU use going up. As the thing launches, it gets going. Just a little proof to try to make you aware. Hey, this is going to use what you told it can. Password, I am awesome. No, that's not the password. Come back, we're up to 10 gigs, and so on. Now, I've got something in the way here, so sorry. I have to keep moving that. I'm going to max the screen out so I can see. And I'm going to come to shutdown and power on. All right, so that's installing. Just wanted to show you some of the resources there. And on the other side of those resources, you can see it emptying those resources out. Again, on the other side of that, let's go back, get out of our snapshots. Let's take a look at, you know what, let's just right click this time. Could just click settings, I guess, but let's go back to details. And take a look at the system. And so it's using 4 gigs. That's what it's using that I gave it. And the processors, it's only getting 1 CPU. So if I want to make that faster, I'll say 2 CPUs and 100%. Just as a reminder, when it's saying CPU, it means core. So I've got 8 cores in this. And the reason this says 16 is because it's hyper-threaded. It's very common. So it's got 8 cores. I can definitely give it 2 cores and let my Fedora run faster and use more CPU. And those are just things you can change. So if you have questions about installing, let me know, and I likely will make another video. Thanks for taking the class. This is important to get this stuff set up within the first couple of weeks while the work is not as hefty as what it's going to be a little later. This is, again, not a super difficult class, but obviously there's things to get done and go through. And to me, they're very exciting things. It's stuff I love to poke into, and hopefully you do too. We'll talk with you later.